How is the authoritarian playbook playing out in America? Welcome to Future Hindsight, where we take big ideas in civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. Because democracy is not a spectator sport, tomorrow starts right now. I'm Mila Atmos. Our guests today are Yelena Litvinov and Tatyana Margolin, co-founders of Stroika, an organization connecting and resourcing frontline anti-authoritarian movements worldwide. Both born under the Soviet Union and raised in the United States, they bring over 3 decades of combined experience in international philanthropy, law, and organizing, from Russia and Hungary to Georgia and Uganda. Today, we're asking them to turn that expertise on America, diagnose where we are, tell us how much time we have, and tell us what actually works. And before we start, if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's easy and free, and it really goes a long way. Check us out at youtube.com/Future Hindsight. Welcome, Yelena and Tatyana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us, Mila.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, walk us through the authoritarian playbook, because we talk about this all the time on the podcast, and I think there's like a shorthand. People kind of have an idea what it is, but not exactly. What are the standard moves? What is the typical progression from early signs to full consolidation?
So we actually are happy that the term is being used more often. I think in the U.S., we didn't talk about the authoritarian playbook so much. Or when we did, it was something that was happening in other parts of the world, in other countries, in other times. But as you said, it is a playbook. There are certain moves that we see time and time again. They can vary context by context because the idea of the playbook is that it is easily transferable and customizable to what will help you consolidate power in your local reality. But the moves that we see most often are, 1, the divide and conquer. You want to pick a group that is easy to scapegoat, easy to target. Here it has been immigrant populations, non-white populations, trans populations, but it is really about picking off an easy target. You do the divide and conquer. You consolidate control over the media. 3rd, you want to take control of institutions that could have checks and balances on your power. So it is discrediting or taking control of the judiciary, of the legislature. The idea is to take control of as many institutions as possible and as many civic institutions as possible that could in some way challenge your ability to do what you want and in the process get resources for yourself. Because in the end, the authoritarian playbook is also about corruption. It is about being able to get resources from the state for yourself and enrich yourself using public office.
This is great because I think a lot of people don't think about the consolidation of authoritarian power to line your pockets. I think they separate those things, but actually it's part and parcel. Tatyana, so much has happened in the last year and a half, and even still, it feels to me like the pace is quickening, like it's just not slowing down at all. How would you place the United States on the authoritarian playbook timeline? Like, what country does America most resemble right now, and at what year or what point in that country's democratic decline?
Yeah, the pace is unmistakably fast, and it has been since day one. We can say many things about this administration. One thing they cannot be accused of is, taking their time and easing into it, right? They hit the ground running from day one. To be fair, they did tell us that they're going to do what they're doing.
Yes.
So the fact that so many of us are surprised is interesting because, they laid out what they planned on doing and they're very systematically pursuing this agenda. Now, when Yelena and I are interviewed, oftentimes as Eurasia experts, the person interviewing us will inevitably make this preface of, well, United States is not yet Russia. They feel this need to say that, we're not there yet. Now, I'll tell you something. Folks we speak with in the context globally where we work have said to us that our government has shrunk space and pursued these policies much, much faster than their full-fledged authoritarians. So, for example, in terms of the judiciary and media, Vladimir Putin took much longer to decimate independent media and to go after it. Same with the courts. To be fair, the courts there were not fully developed. Institutions were still building. But nevertheless, the speed of events here has really caught off guard even those who lived under full-fledged authoritarianism. So for me, it's a little bit difficult to make an exact comparison with another country. But I would say that at the current moment, obviously authoritarians haven't fully consolidated power, but they've made really strong strides. And one aspect I'm going to add to Yelena's really helpful checklist is preemptive obedience. That's a really critical tool in the authoritarian toolbox. They really hope that folks are going to get scared. Particularly, it's very effective with the business community, that they're going to get nervous, they're going to get scared, and they're just going to drop anything that's potentially controversial that might compromise them and hope that things are just going to blow over if they go along with the administration. We can give you a hint. It never works.
It never works. Yes, it never works. Well, look at Target, right? Mm-hmm. They did it almost right away. They dropped their DEI initiatives, and there's nobody enforcing something like this.
That's right.
Right? Like if universities did it and many universities didn't, and they stood up and they said, we're not going to do that. And there were no consequences for something like continuing to do DEI. Although, of course, within the federal government, these initiatives were dismantled. So, Yelena, you've seen what happens in countries where the window to act closes, meaning the moment passed to take action and people didn't recognize it until it was too late. And just now we're talking about the pace. So looking at America right now, are we still inside that window? And how would we know if we have already missed it?
It's a really great question, and it's very important to remember that we are very much well within the window to act. And in fact, if you look at places that I think we have almost given up on as places of full authoritarian consolidation, there actually is still even there a window to act, and there are people standing up and protesting in ways that feel safe to them. There are people doing independent reporting and journalism, taking civic action in really creative ways, even in places that are so close, so authoritarian, where protest is criminalized and folks are going out on the streets doing creative arts actions. There was somebody in Russia when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, they were putting in stores where the price tag is on a store shelf, they would put little tags that would note the number of people that have been killed in the war. So it was illegal to talk about the war. You couldn't even mention that a war was happening. And yet somebody of school age was going into their local supermarket and putting these tags out to send a message that, hey, this war is actually going on despite what the government is telling you, and it's not okay. And these are the human costs of the war. So I say that to say that there are always modalities of resistance. There are always ways that we can stand up and say this is not okay. And in fact, for the United States, in contrast, protest remains absolutely legal. Yes, have we seen violence at protests? Sure, for our entire history. Have we seen government pressure on activist groups and on nonprofits? Absolutely. This also is not new for the United States. But at the end of the day, we have so much room still to get our voice out, to be able to criticize the government publicly, whether it's in online fora or in person. This is huge. And while, yes, we have some corruption and co-optation of courts, there are still courts very much working. There are still political processes that remain functional. And we need to hold on to that and hold that line. And I think the critical thing for Americans to remember is in these times, it is sometimes necessary to rewrite how we define success or victory. I think in the U.S., we love a narrative arc with a happy ending. There is a challenge, there is a bad guy, we all push back, and we win. It might not look like that. It might not look like that anytime soon. We might need to have a lot of perseverance and resilience for a long haul of a narrative arc. And it might mean that just holding the line or keeping a bad thing from happening or keeping a bad thing from being as bad as it could be is in itself a victory and a win. And we really need to, for our own resilience these days, we need to really celebrate those wins and hold on to them because this is going to be a long journey. It's going to be a long fight. And we need to maintain our stamina for that long haul.
Right, right. Well, we just had Daniel Hunter on, who is an organizer, and he talked about how creative protest is really important. And for example, he pointed to the Tesla protests and he said, listen, people don't put those two things together. But one of the reasons Elon Musk had to leave the White House is because people were protesting at Tesla showrooms and burning up cars. And the Tesla board was like, you got to come back and fix this and work here instead of over there. He also said in the interview that we had with him that the evidence from other countries show that when people rely on courts alone, the authoritarian consolidates power. And thinking about the Supreme Court, there's a mixed record. Of course, there's a mixed record all across the courts, across the country. So, Tatyana, in comparable situations in other countries, when the courts or the military or the press, the civil service have actually held in those instances, what was the difference? What made it hold?
You know, I listened to that interview with huge interest because our themes really cross over so much in our work. But I grew up, as you mentioned, right, in the Soviet Union. And I left when I was already almost full-formed adult. So I remember very much what it's like to live under really a crumbling authoritarianism, right? The systems were already failing. I mean, the Soviet Union wasn't yet dead, but, it was on palliative care. It was, heading there. And my take on what's going on is quite different than those who've lived in the United States.
Okay, tell us more.
Well, because, for example, Daniel was putting a lot of effort and kind of attention on economic boycotts, right?
Yes.
And I think economic boycotts are great, and we have the ability to participate in them.
Mm-hmm.
However, the businesses that do preemptive compliance and that do this preemptive obedience, they're not just competing for their customers. In authoritarianism, businesses become owned by governments, again, even if not formally, right? The government becomes their pocket. That's what happened in Russia.
Yeah.
So businesses that went along with, and they didn't resist.
What's happening here?
Right.
People are getting government contracts.
That's it. So we can feel really great about unsubscribing from Disney. And I thought that was a wonderful, very inspiring moment in this fight so far, right? It was one of the few reprieves that we had when Jimmy Kimmel was reinstated.
Yes.
But we can't just hope that by not shopping at Target is going to somehow, regain a conscience. Because what happens to the economy, it gets fully reoriented to the authoritarian model. And that's how it gets really deeply embedded, because it's one thing for us, for the people to imagine like a freer life. Oh, we had meaningless elections. It would be really cool to try meaningful elections. But for businesses to transform from being lackeys of the government to a free market economy back, to do the journey back, much tougher. It's much easier to sit on an endless government payroll of oil money, as we see in Russia, also oil money here, et cetera. So I'm always brought in to make folks a little bit more depressed. Yelena is a little more hopeful. Yelena came to the United States younger. But I don't say this in order for us to feel powerless. I say this in order for us to have a full picture of what we are able to do and what we're able to accomplish. And so we don't feel defeated when we don't get the narrative arc. So back to your original question.
Yes. What has made the difference for the courts or the military or the press or civil service to hold the line?
I think we have actually all the elements in place for our institutions to hold. We do. The biggest change that happens to an immigrant from a corrupt country like me who comes to America is this incredible realization that people follow laws just because, right? They don't steal. When things are free, like when you used to put a quarter into a newspaper dispenser, remember those machines?
Yes.
When I came, I was like, okay, you put a quarter in, you open it up. I moved to the city of Pittsburgh. So you take one Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But in theory, you could take 20.
Yes.
No one's watching you. They're all sitting there for you to steal, sell, whatever. I mean, to someone who came from the world that I came from, that was an astonishing evidence of trust between the public and the businesses and society. It was like a societal contract that no one really signed, but they lived under this understanding. And I took only one newspaper because I was like, well, I'm not in the world anymore where people take 5, right? Someone will see me. And then, of course, you're like, but why would I even need more than one? But someone who grew up under a very watchful world of constant scheming, because that's what you needed to survive, it was really shocking. And what is really upsetting to me here is to watch this contract. It's not broken yet, but it is under question. It is being compromised. And I think what will help us hold the line is U.S. civil society really reminding, because this is the moment for the third pillar right now, right? We have a very vibrant, strong civil society in America that is envy of everyone in the world. And it is the moment for civil society to keep reminding us, the judges, the people, that we have this contract, that we stand for fairness, that we stand for law, that we stand for justice, that we oppose unfair enrichment. That's what I think is going to help us hold the line.
Actually, there's something optimistic for me, counterintuitively, in the speed and pace of destruction that we're seeing, because when it is so quick, there are so many people for whom that exact social contract that Tatyana was describing, it is part of some narrative around American values. And of course, we all know as students of history and as real analysts of American society that we've never lived up to that American dream. And yet it is somehow in the water. It is in our collective consciousness as a nation. And given the speed of the destruction, your ordinary American who's not that plugged into current events says, oh, I don't want to talk about politics. Even they're saying, hey, this isn't us. This isn't what we're about. This is not the set of shared values and the shared social contract that we all agreed to. In that speed, there is, I think, for me, a spark of hope in making a lot more people wake up and kind of gain a consciousness around what our institutions and our civil society did have that's suddenly missing. I think we were taking a lot of things for granted. Even this term civil society, we don't talk about civil society in the U.S. This is a term we talk about in other countries. We need to build up, defend, develop civil society. We just take it for granted that there are hundreds of thousands of nonprofits who are providing social services, that there are journalists who are providing us with information. We think these are normal things that just exist around us. So when suddenly these very neutral institutions, a nonprofit who's talking about clean water and clean air, why are you calling them anti-American criminals? That's weird. These are journalists reporting on things happening in our local school board, and you're calling them names, nasty names. That's odd. That's not what we want to believe about ourselves as a country. And I think there's an opportunity right now for us as a civil society to tell a story about that, about the value of media and nonprofits, about the value of civic institutions and judges who actually uphold the law. I think people are hungry for that right now. They want a better story about us.
Okay, so my next question is about what we can do in the next 12 to 24 hours, because we're still in the window. There's time. We have strong civil societies as it is. Right now, we need new narratives, or we need to remind ourselves about the strength of civil society and telling ourselves these stories. But tactically, what else should we be doing?
First and foremost, we cannot descend into hopelessness and helplessness. That is, I think, right now the number one risk. And it is actually very connected to complying in advance. When you believe there's nothing you can do, that there's nothing that we as a society can do, you throw up your hands, they've already won. In fact, there are so many things that they have not been able to accomplish. This government has made attempts to close down so many institutions of civil society and failed. We've had a lot of wins in the courts. So I think, one, we gotta really hold each of those wins, celebrate those wins. Two, we need to get hope from our own history and from those around the world who have dealt with and lived through much tougher. We can't be covering our head with our pillows and saying everything's so horrible. I think it is a disservice to our ancestors here who have dealt with so much worse across our own history, and to people all around the world who are saying, I'm going to stand up and do something even in the worst political circumstances. They look at us and they say, but look, you all still go out and protest in the streets and nobody's throwing you in jail for it. What do you mean? What are you complaining about? And then the third, and most importantly, this is really the time to go local. You want to look at who is it in your local community who is at risk. Maybe they're not under attack now, but who are the groups, again, the journalists, the activists, the nonprofit organizations providing essential services who you can stand with, members of your local school board, your local government. Who can you stand with and provide resources to? And by resources, I don't just mean money, though that's certainly a much-needed resource in these times, particularly for embattled nonprofit organizations. But resources include time. They include your ability to write well. They include your social networks. Talk to your friends. Talk to your family. Talk to your colleagues. Use whatever platform you have to talk about the value that that nonprofit is providing to your local community. Talk about the value of local journalism. Talk about why it means something that we stand with these organizations and individuals and institutions, and that we do not fall into hopelessness and helplessness. I think that is a very concrete thing that you can do right now. Pick one organization, one community to stand with, and think about one thing you can do every single week to stand with that community.
We'll be back with Tatyana and Yelena in just a moment, so stick around. You'll definitely want to tune in to this episode's Civic Spark. One small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, I have to tell you, when I first started Future Hindsight all those years ago, every day seemed to introduce another question that needed an answer, and doing it all on my own was really overwhelming. I'm sure you can relate when your to-do list just grows and grows with new tasks every day. It can pretty easily start to take over your life if you're not careful. But what if you could find the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything? Sounds like a game changer, right? For millions of businesses out there, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, from household names like Rhode Beauty to fresh brands that are just getting started. And Shopify is there for you too. You can get the word out as if you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. Now, you might be wondering, what if people haven't heard about my brand? It's okay. Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. So, tackle all those important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. Everything is all in one spot, making your life easier and your business operations smoother. What I love about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. It's time to turn those what-ifs into cha-ching with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/hopeful. Go to shopify.com/hopeful. That's shopify.com/hopeful. Are you numb to it yet? This wild ride of life we've lived lately, I mean? All this doom and gloom around AI, the constant geopolitical changes shaking up the globe, and the market is bouncing around like a yo-yo. It's no wonder most of us are hunkering down, saving, and looking for ways to protect our futures. One way you may have forgotten about is through the right life insurance policy. You've heard of life insurance, but did you know it's cheaper than you think? The younger you are, the cheaper it is. Like double the price if you wait to buy a decade from now. That's why so many are looking for a life insurance policy today with SelectQuote. I'd like to thank SelectQuote for supporting Future Hindsight. If you're new to life insurance, you're not alone. Thankfully, I've found SelectQuote. For over 40 years, SelectQuote has helped more than 2 million Americans understand their options and get the coverage they need. Over $700 billion in coverage and counting. As a broker, their mission is simple: to find you the right insurance policy at the best price. SelectQuote takes the guesswork out of finding the right life insurance policy. You don't have to sort through dozens of confusing options on your own. Instead, one of their licensed agents will find the right policy at the right price for you, comparing plans from trusted, top-rated insurance companies to find a policy that fits your health, your lifestyle, and your budget. And they work for you for free. You'll be covered faster than you think. SelectQuote works with providers who offer same-day coverage up to $2 million worth with no medical exam required. And you're not out of luck if you have pre-existing health conditions, because SelectQuote partners with companies that offer policies for people with conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease. SelectQuote makes life insurance simple, even if this is your first time thinking about it. Head to selectquote.com/hopeful, and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Life insurance is never cheaper than it is today. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at selectquote.com/hopeful. Save more than 50% on term life insurance at selectquote.com/hopeful today to get started. That's selectquote.com/hopeful. And now let's return to my conversation with Tatyana and Yelena.
I would love to add something to what Yelena just said. To me, what's so dangerous about this moment, and again, this moment is not today. I think this moment is started much earlier, but it's this lack of a shared reality among all Americans, right? We are living in a polarized world. These are almost things we've accepted. But what does that really mean? What is the danger of a polarized world, right? The countries where we worked in. A danger of a polarized world where you are fully removed from any other perspective is that any story could be sold to you, right? Disinformation becomes reality because if you don't see something with your own eyes, you can be told anything. I mean, what happened in 2022 in Russia and Ukraine is that Russians were sold a story about Ukrainians being the enemy, right? It was a story long in the making, but by creating this alternate reality and cutting off a shared reality, they were able to tell them that their neighbor is their enemy. Mm-hmm. And what I think is really lacking here in this moment is us trying to make more shared stories, because it's much more difficult to dispute a shared reality. So when you are in a local community, and again, with Yelena, I also really believe in the local right now. This country is enormous. And everyone is kind of expecting of Americans to do one single thing, right? I think that's why there's been so much attention paid to No Kings protests, which are great. People should keep doing that. But I think the way we're going to fight this thing and beat this thing is on very local actions. So in your community, folks are much more likely to believe someone who lives in a town over them than someone who is sitting in New York and telling them how to live, right? So everyone needs to be, I know this is said left and right, cross the divides, talk to your neighbors, but that's so critical because your neighbor knows you. They trust you, right? They trust you to pick up their mail. They ask you to water the plants when they're gone. In those moments, it doesn't matter who you voted for. It doesn't matter what, messages are targeted at each of you via your own individual algorithm. You overcome these divides. And that's when the opening happens. And this country has spent actually years teaching the rest of the world on how to do what do we call this? Community organizing, right? How to talk to your neighbors. Like that's the sauce that we almost invented here and exported to the rest of the world and then forgot how to do it ourselves. I want us to remember what we already know how to do. This isn't a new skill. People know how to do this. They have been taught to forget it by design.
Right. Well, I just want to point out here that I think we do that even without thinking about it, right? Like exactly. I have friends in my community that I have known for a long time who are the parents of children who go to school with my children, and I know that they voted for Trump 3 times.
Right.
But, I don't hate them.
Right.
And we are lovely with each other, and we can have dinner together, and we don't talk about politics, but maybe that's the part that we should be doing. But it's the kind of thing where she also knows I never voted for Trump, and she knows that I don't have, horns or something like this. You know what I'm saying? She knows that I'm also a normal person, and that she also enjoys spending time with me.
That's so critical to preserve these bridges, right?
Right.
And again, I feel the same way, right? The way I interact with folks who are not like me is via my kids. It's parents on the soccer team whom, again, we wouldn't choose each other socially, for example, but we were brought together. And it creates an opportunity. It creates an opening. It creates camaraderie. So when I'm painted in, some sort of evil colors, for example, on media that they're consuming, they will know that that doesn't compute, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, Yelena and I spent years working for George Soros' foundations, and the public is fed a lot of disinformation about the evilness of George Soros and Open Science Foundation, et cetera. So it's one thing when someone hears that from Glenn Beck on Fox News. It's another thing when, I'm coaching their kids' soccer and they see me being loving with their kid, et cetera. That's when we're really going to break this disinformation, because there has not been yet a solution to this massive disinformation we're living in. no one's come up with it, right? Like many researchers have been given grants. They're doing a lot of studies, focus groups, et cetera, and we don't know. We don't know how to break through with it. I think this is how we're going to do it. And again, I think it's in the DNA of this country, right? These communities do coalesce around circumstances. This is a very transient society we're living in. So, people move, they make new friends, they make new communities over and over again. That's what distinguishes the U.S., by the way, from many other countries. Mm-hmm. And I think this is our opportunity, just to keep this dialogue, to keep this conversation with the other, proverbial other side.
Right.
Because I think what I really would love to have mentioned in laying out the playbook is fear and isolation.
That's it.
I think a critical ingredient for any authoritarian is, one, to push a fear-based narrative. You are so scared of somebody over there whose success means less for you. And that only works if you're isolated. And of course, technology right now, economic realities make it so much easier for us to be isolated. We don't have to leave the house. It used to be you had to go to the store. You had to interact with your neighbors. It's now very easy. Apps have made it very frictionless to never interact with other human beings. And that's very dangerous right now. And it's the way that technology can really enable that authoritarian isolation. And also, I do think technology has some of the keys to breaking down that isolation. There are ways that we can connect with each other and learn about each other, having never met, having never interacted in a soccer field with our kids, because we actually have gone on TikTok, YouTube, etc., and seen the daily life of somebody who someone told me that's my enemy, but I'm seeing them live a normal life and have the same problems as me and have the same issues as me, have the same hopes and dreams as me, and realize we all kind of want the same things.
Yeah, we all want the same things. Well, speaking of fear and isolation, your model at Stroika is explicitly intersectional and cross-movement. But on the left, American progressives have historically struggled with coalition building across race, class, and issues. So what is the theory behind this kind of solidarity? And is there a real-life example that you'd like to point to illustrate how this works?
Whatever your issue is that you care about, that you are worried about, and it might be climate change, it might be access to health care for your kids, good education, it might be women's rights, LGBTQI rights, racial justice, democracy preservation, whatever your issue on the quote-unquote progressive left, authoritarianism is a threat to what you need, right? Your issue is at risk because of this very transnational system that we face right now of anti-democratic forces. We talked about the playbook looking very similar because in country by country, they are finding ways to limit a range of rights because all of those things that I listed are not good for authoritarian consolidation. They don't want those things because it doesn't allow them to line their pockets and buy their yachts and so on if you've got a lot of democracy and free press and everyone's got rights. So we need to understand that all the things that we want to be fighting for are all at risk. And it is in the authoritarians' best interests to keep us isolated, to keep us enmeshed in our own movements and our own problems, and to be so overwhelmed by attacks on our own movement, on our own issue, that we are constantly just busy putting out fires and not noticing that everyone else is also putting out the same kind of fire. And that's part of the playbook. It's by design. If they can make you feel, one, so overwhelmed that, oh my God, everything's at stake for us. We're going to lose these hard-fought rights. So let's wait and deal with climate justice later. Let's deal with racial justice issues later. When things get a little calmer and better, we'll deal with those things down the... No. Right now, we have to hold the line and stand shoulder to shoulder and in solidarity across our issues because what they want us to do is feel divided, feel overwhelmed, and be in competition with each other for resources, for airtime, for people's attention. And going back to what we were talking about with the isolation and the fragmentation of our national discourse, I think when people are on the receiving end of that, they get exhausted. They say, well, I don't know which one of you is screaming loudest, so let me throw up my hands. It seems like everything's bad. But when we come together and we say, it's not about my issue or your issue. It's not about my group being more protected and therefore your group is going to be less protected or vice versa. It's that we all together have to stand for one another's rights. This cliche is always used, it's that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, but it really is true. I think right now there's a real risk that some groups, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's funders, whether it's the business community or media organizations, they say, well, if we just step away from these controversial issues, those topics that are at risk or under attack right now, we'll stay under the radar and we'll be safe. And I think the number one lesson from any other authoritarian context is that doesn't exist. You won't be safe. Once they figure out how to dismantle and attack a particular movement, organization, type of company working on a particular set of issues, they're just testing out a playbook. And they're going to take those same exact moves and they're going to use them on you. Mm-hmm. We're all next.
Rinse, repeat.
Rinse, repeat. They're just getting more sophisticated each time around. So it is incumbent upon us to say who is most at risk, how can we all stand together and have their backs? Because if we have their backs, they're going to have our backs.
Right.
We have many examples in countries where we worked where issues went from being totally neutral and safe to not being so.
Okay.
And so I think that's very instructive for the U.S. because in the U.S., again, this is a message that we've been carrying since our founding, really.
Yes.
There's no vaccine against authoritarianism here, right? We weren't somehow born and got immune to having that kind of regime in this country. Mm-hmm. Americans really think that we were. And, this is American exception, et cetera.
That's
it doesn't exist. There's no invisible force protecting us from that becoming the reality here. Mm-hmm. Because we have seen already, in the short 13 months of this administration, it is unbelievable how many rights have been curtailed, right? How many things have been destroyed, how many norms have shifted just in 13 months. In a country that is so proud of its democratic institutions, where under Trump 1, we were screaming from top of our lungs that institutions are going to protect us. I mean, we no longer have U.S. aid.
Yes.
Just process that alone.
Yeah.
And that's not the only thing. But I'll give you an example of when we saw something go from neutral to toxic, not overnight, but fairly quickly. In Russia, for many years when we were working in philanthropy, we're watching an organization called Memorial. It was the first truly human rights organization in Russia, established in the 90s when the country was opening up. And their mission was to preserve memory of gulags, to connect people with their personal family histories, because a lot of these archives were secretive under the Soviet Union. They became open, and Memorial made them accessible to the people. People were able to type in their last name online and learn these family secrets they'd never known about, because their grandfather may have gone missing and no one knew what happened to him. But via Memorial, they were able to see that, wow, my grandfather was sent to this penal colony and perished there or went to this labor camp. I mean, it was really transformative. And there was not a single person who was not touched by it. I mean, my family learned things about us, Yelena's family, everyone. And again, it wasn't just for the kind of the democracy-loving people. I mean, the policemen of the government were also learning about their history. So we always thought Memorial is this model of an organization that is serving absolutely everyone. And collective memory is called collective memory for a reason, right? It encapsulates everyone's experience. It was just an institution that was there. And again, we weren't even thinking that it was safe and unsafe. We just didn't think it was under any kind of threat. But then we started seeing attacks on Memorial. And to us watching from here, it was really bizarre because, they just seemed so vegetarian, so non-controversial. Mm-hmm. But then we started thinking, in 2014, when Crimea was annexed and when the war in Ukraine was started, oh, right, to teach the people that their neighbor, their brother, their cousin is their enemy, you need to rewrite history. You need to tell them a different story. Whereas everyone in the former Soviet Union was impacted by these gulag repressive policies, we can no longer tell that common story, right? If we want to teach them to hate their neighbor. And so Memorial became a target. Eventually, concluding in liquidation of the organization, they were legally liquidated. Now, this is both a cautionary tale of how something can go from neutral to not overnight, but it's also a very positive, inspiring tale because guess what? Memorial, though legally liquidated, still exists. They have evacuated a lot of the records, a lot of the archives. They've preserved them. You could still go on their website. You could still learn about your family history. Yes, they don't have protections in Russia. They don't have an office there anymore. So, of course, the barrier is now there that used to not be there, right? The average Russian may not be willing to go on their website because they've been declared enemy of the state, but they didn't die, right? The memory has been preserved. And we use this as an example of how even in the most restrictive settings, like in a full shutdown, right? Authoritarian, full consolidation. There is no civil society left on the one hand, right? You can't do anything. I mean, the woman who was putting stickers was arrested, went to prison with a very severe sentence. So even putting a sticker somewhere can cause that horrible, severe consequence. Even there, people are finding openings and persisting.
That's very hopeful.
I think you wanted also a positive example of the intersectionality.
Yes,
So
give me one positive
I can give
example.
you just one example from our own work.
Yes.
So thinking about where intersectionality leads to real progress in standing up against authoritarianism, I think about two kinds of silos that we work in. One is the thematic, that every kind of movement is only thinking about themselves, but also geographic. We often don't look beyond our own borders in our work. And so I want to give an example from LGBTQI organizing in Eastern Africa, where in Kenya, for example, in Uganda, a lot of those governments have been using a similar playbook of restricting the work of LGBTQI organizations, sometimes through direct criminalization of their work, but sometimes through very restrictive nonprofit laws forcing groups to re-register, to do a lot of onerous reporting, endure audits that other types of organizations don't have to go through, etc. Now, if you were looking at those countries in isolation and those groups working in those contexts, they're saying we're being attacked in a unique way, that their government is targeting them specifically. But if you zoom out a little bit, those governments have been attending international conferences with members of parliament from other countries in, for example, Moscow. So there was a meeting in Moscow with a lot of parliamentarians from Kenya and Uganda, for example, where they talked through techniques and strategies for limiting the work of civil society organizations, including those that protect LGBTQI rights. And it was only because we brought together Russian, Ugandan, and Kenyan queer activists into one meeting place where they could talk to each other, get to know each other as people, build trust, and talk through, what did your government do? Oh, this parliamentarian from your country? Oh, yeah, they did attend this meeting. Our journalists were there and tracked who was attending that meeting. And by building these connections between journalist communities, activist communities, folks in their respective contexts who were all dealing with similar attacks, that they came to realize by talking to each other that their governments were actually meeting, exchanging strategies, exchanging tactics on basically how to limit the rights of these respective groups in order to consolidate power. So governments are working transnationally and intersectionally. So we need to as well. These movements were able to actually, by exchanging information, by getting this insight from each other, come up with real strategies locally based on that insight that they got from their colleagues and counterparts in other countries. We need to be doing that kind of cross-border strategizing in order to be making a difference right now.
Got it. So I have a long-term question about a new reconstruction of sorts of American democracy. When the authoritarian pressure lifts, if it does, what does the longer work of actually strengthening American democratic institutions look like to you?
I do imagine like a quite radical realignment of the way politics is done here. And, in the most hopeful scenario, that's what this moment will enable for us, right? Like this full rupture will allow us to rebuild with, quote unquote, better materials, right? With better structures, with better ideas. I think one potential positive is just engagement of people who have been disengaged and disenfranchised for many, many years, right? For them to understand that actually this does relate to my life. I mean, we've had historically very low voter turnout in this country. And to me, to be fair, like in the immigrant community, we always joke about it. Like this is a benefit of success, right? This is a benefit of a good life. You don't feel this need to vote. You don't take it as a privilege, right? It's just like whatever. So I think, and we've seen this, by the way, in Hungary. We've seen voter turnout increase a lot under Orban. I mean, they haven't yet voted him out, but nevertheless, I see like a full renewed engagement in the democratic process as a possible positive takeaway. And as part of that, many things will be spurred into action. I mean, I'm not going to go as dreamy and say that we're going to have more than 2 political parties, although
that would be nice,
right?
Nice.
It's nice to pause and dream. And, we do have much bigger problems to solve, such as money in politics, right? Citizens United, et cetera. Like, there have been a lot of very negative developments that really need to be fixed.
Yeah.
But maybe this re-engagement of a wider swath of the population, and again, of a younger population, right? Because we do have a very geriatric political scene right now.
Yes.
Which is also a huge problem. I think if we are to be, again, I don't wear rosy-colored glasses nearly as often as like Yelena, for example,
Please.
but, I'm sometimes force them upon me. That's what I see as a potential rebuilding.
Excellent. All right, I have 2 more questions. So every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guests to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. So what's a good way to turn the insights that you have shared with us into action?
We talked a lot today about local community, local connection. So one thing you can do is get to know your neighbors, get to know your community, get to know your local civic institutions. How are decisions made about your school board, about your local budget, about local political moves, policies? Where do those come from? Who's doing those things? I think if we're talking about a long-term future, a long-term rebuilding, it's going to be by all of us feeling empowered to be active participants in our society, to not wait for somebody from somewhere over there to come and save us. Do your homework now. Get to know how decisions are made. Who is it in your local community who is a decision maker? And work with your neighbors to tell a better story about what you want out of this country. Authoritarians are telling us a story of fear. They have rightfully diagnosed a problem. We are collectively unhappy with how our society has been structured. But their prescription for that diagnosis is an incorrect one because it is based in fear and isolation. We need to together tell a better story, and we cannot do that alone. We need to come together and say, what do we want for our society? What do we want for our country? Tell that story together, say it loudly, say it publicly, and step out in solidarity with your neighbors in every way you can to bring that story to the mainstream.
So, Tatyana, you just mentioned that you do not have rose-colored glasses. However, we already discussed here that we cannot lose hope. So, looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
I knew this was coming.
Yes.
So I gave it some thought.
Okay, great.
I do think this is a moment of far greater engagement. I think this is a moment of folks realizing that they can't just sit it out. When their teachers, their neighbors are being snatched off the streets, out of the classrooms, in places that are not used to being the center of things. I think people are coming, they're waking up. They're seeing that actually immigrants are a fabric of our community. We cannot live without them. They matter. They're just like us. The mobilization in Minneapolis has given me tremendous hope. When I'm watching segments on the news or on social media of people showing up to their congresspeople's offices and saying, why did you take away my health care? Like, people are making the connection between their day-to-day life and politicians. That's incredibly hopeful. There has been a destruction of civic education in this country, and unfortunately, people are having to learn in real time right now why civic engagement matters, but at least we're learning in real time. I really see this as a moment of a renewed social contract of Americans with their new America that they really do want to see, rather than the one that's being sold to us by the corrupt politicians that are currently in office.
Yeah, here. That is hopeful. Well, Yelena, Tatyana, thank you so much for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you both on the show.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for forcing us to be hopeful.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yelena Litvinov and Tatyana Margolin are co-founders of Stroika, an organization connecting and resourcing frontline anti-authoritarian movements worldwide. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. get to know your neighbors. We're always beating the drum about getting involved at the local level here in Future Hindsight. And the first step is to learn about the decision makers around you. We can all be active in our community, and it starts with building solidarity with our neighbors and with telling the story that we all collectively want to hear and that we all collectively want to achieve in this country. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Oh, and while you're there, please leave us a review. It really goes a long way, I promise. And if you're listening on your browser, you can find Future Hindsight on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. We are here to build your civic action toolkit every week. So follow Future Hindsight now, and we'll come right to you. And if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent pro-democracy podcast, consider subscribing to the Civics Club on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/futurehindsight now to join. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zack Travis and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.